thing we've done is increase spending on the NHS, which is something that has only happened because of the commitment we made at the last election. So an extra £11.6 billion will be going into the NHS because of the decisions we've taken. In addition to that, there's a £200 million cancer drugs fund, so people get the drugs they need. And for the first time in a long time, the number of doctors is growing very quickly, and the number of bureaucrats is actually falling.
Miliband! Mr. Speaker, in case the Prime Minister didn't realise, it takes 7 years to train a doctor. So I'd like to thank him for his congratulations for our record on the NHS. Now, and I have to say to him, if it's all going so well, why do we see the number of people waiting for diagnosis rising again this morning? Over 10,000 people waiting to get their tests. That's 3 times the number it was a year ago. Now, I noticed also he didn't mention his top-down reorganisation when he talked about his handling of the NHS. Let me remind him what he said just a month ago, Mr. Speaker. He said, "I've been involved in designing these changes way back into opposition with Andrew Lansley." Can he therefore confirm that the failing NHS plans are not the Health Secretary's fault, they're his?
The Leader of the Opposition himself has said that no change is not an option. So what we're seeing is the usual empty opposition. Now I'm glad that he mentioned waiting times, because it was 2 weeks ago that at that dispatch box he said, and I quote, "Waiting times have risen month on month under this government." That is not true. The figures which he had at the time, the figures showed that for inpatient waiting times they fell from 9.1 to 9 weeks, and for outpatients they went down from 4.8 weeks to 3.5 weeks. That is the lowest for a year. Now, it is important when we come to this House and we make statements that are inaccurate, we correct the record at the first available opportunity. Hold on. So would he like to take this opportunity to correct that specific mistake?
No, Mr. Speaker, waiting times are rising. And I noticed he didn't even take the opportunity to take responsibility for the health policy. Where is the Health Secretary after all? Where is the Health Secretary? And I have to say to him, it's becoming a pattern with this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, because this morning in the papers we see the Universities Minister being dumped on for his tuition fees policy. We see the School Secretary being dumped on for his free schools policy. And the poor Deputy Prime Minister, he just gets dumped on every day of the week. Now he must believe that something's gone wrong with his health policy, Mr. Speaker, because he's launched his so-called listening exercise. Now, can he reassure doctors, nurses and patients that it's a genuine exercise?
Of course it is a genuine exercise, but let me just be clear, he is wrong on the waiting times. The figures are clear. I will place them in the library of the House of Commons. Waiting times went down last month, and he ought to have the guts and the courage to correct the record when he gets it wrong. Now, he asks about my Health Secretary. Perhaps I could remind him what his Health Secretary has said. And he said this week. The general aims of the reforms are sound. That is what he said. He said earlier, I have no problem with the broad aim of the changes, and went on to praise them. I have to say, looking at this, it all reminds me of Labour 30 years ago. They had a leader with the ratings of Michael Foot, and he was being undermined by someone called Healy as well. Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, we read in the papers about the PMQ's makeover. Well, I have to say it didn't last very long because Flashman is back. But of course, Flashman doesn't answer the question. So let me try the question on him again. What can he explain why the Chief Executive of the NHS, Sir David Nicholson, wrote to NHS staff on the 13th of April after his so-called pause had begun, and he said this, that NHS staff should, and I quote, press on with implementation of the plans. Mr. Speaker, that doesn't sound like a pause to me.
I can absolutely guarantee there will be significant and substantial changes to the reforms because we want to get them right, because we want to guarantee an NHS free at the point of use, available on need rather than ability to pay, and unlike the party opposite that is now cutting the NHS in Wales, this government will put more money into the NHS. Now he talks about what is in the newspapers today. He ought to be looking at the GPs representing 7 million patients who are writing to the papers today to say this is evolution, not revolution. It's good for patients and it's going to help, and I quote, some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Now he asks about, I admit, I have to accept some of the recent cultural references, Michael Winner, Benny Hill, they are all, I accept, a little bit out of date. But I have to say, I look at the honourable gentleman who told us the fight back, who told us the fight back would start in Scotland before going down to a massive defeat. It rather reminds me of Eddie the Eagle. In Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, let me congratulate him on getting 42 GPs to write to the Daily Telegraph supporting his plans. The Royal College of GPs represents 42,000 GPs. And they say this, from the Prime Minister who said he would protect the NHS, they say this, and I would have thought he'd be embarrassed about this, they say his plans will cause irreparable damage to the core values of the NHS. And the truth is, I don't know whether he even knows about this letter that David Nicholson sent, but the truth is, his pause is nothing more than a sham.
Why doesn't the honourable gentleman, for once in his life, actually deal with the substance of the reform? The truth of the matter is this. The truth of the matter is this. He has said quite rightly that no change is not an option. We believe no change is not an option. That is what the overwhelming amount of people in the NHS feel. Look at the elements of the reform. GP fund holding started under Labour, now improved under this coalition. Foundation hospitals started under Labour, now being taken forward by this coalition. Payment by results, so we make sure we get good value for money in the NHS, started under Labour, now being carried forward under this coalition. That's the point. He should be seriously engaging in how we make sure we have a strong NHS for all our people for the future. Instead, we have empty opposition, which got him absolutely nowhere last week.
Mr. Speaker, in a phrase he's familiar with, calm down, dear, calm down. Doesn't his mess on the NHS tell us all we need to know about this Prime Minister? He breaks his promises, he doesn't think things through, and when the going gets tough, he dumps on his colleagues. On a day when waiting lists are rising, it confirms what you always knew about the Tories. You can't trust the Tories on the NHS.
What we've seen is just the product of empty opposition and weak leadership. It is this government that's putting more money into the NHS. It's this government that's putting money into the Cancer Drugs Fund. It's this government that's seeing the number of doctors and nurses grow while the number of bureaucrats shrinks. It is this party that is defending the NHS, and it's Labour in Wales that is cutting the NHS. That's the truth. There's only one party you can trust on the NHS, and it's the one that I lead.